She ran until her lungs burned and the trees blurred into shadow, and then she fell, not onto the ground, into him. A man with golden eyes, bare feet on the cold forest floor, and a silence that felt older than the cedars surrounding them. He did not ask her name. He did not call for help. He simply wrapped his arms around her trembling body and said, "You're safe now. Nothing in these woods will touch you while I'm here." She should have been afraid of him. Instead, for the first time in years, she believed every word. Welcome to our channel. Tell us where you're listening from today. The forest had no mercy for lost women. Seren Calloway had known that before she stepped off the trail. She had known it the way she knew most things. Through books, through careful study, through the measured distance of someone who had spent her entire life observing the world, rather than living inside it. She had a master's degree in botany. She could identify 200 species of Pacific Northwest flora by scent alone. She had mapped this section of Olympic National Forest 4 times in the past 3 years. None of that knowledge told her what to do when the growling started. It had come from behind her, low and resonant, the kind of sound that bypassed rational thought and went straight to the oldest part of the brain, the part that remembered being prey. She had been crouching near a fallen cedar, cataloguing a rare species of shelf fungus, her notebook balanced on her knee, when the air changed. The birds stopped, the insects stopped, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And then the growling. She had turned slowly, telling herself it was a coyote, maybe a dog that had wandered from one of the campgrounds near Hurricane Ridge. But the animals at the edge of the trees were neither of those things. They were enormous, dark-coated, with shoulders that rose nearly to her chest, eyes that caught the fading afternoon light and threw it back amber. Not one animal, 3. Serene did the only reasonable thing a scientist with a master's degree could do in that moment. She ran. The forest swallowed her whole. She crashed through fern beds and ducked under low branches, her field bag slapping against her hip, her breath already ragged and uneven. She could hear them behind her, not howling, not the dramatic sound she had half expected, just that terrible rhythmic weight of something large moving fast through undergrowth that did not slow it down at all. Something that was not tiring. Think. She had been trained to think under pressure. You are on the north slope. The trailhead is 2 miles east. The river is downhill to the west. Water. If you reach water, her foot found nothing. The ground simply ended, a moss-covered lip above a shallow ravine she had not seen in the low light, and she went over it before her brain finished the thought. She grabbed at a cedar root, felt it tear loose, and then she was falling, rolling, branches whipping across her face and arms, her notebook flying free somewhere above her in the grey air, and then solid, warm arms. She hit something that did not give like the ground would have, something that grunted softly on impact, absorbed her momentum, and held. She found herself pressed against a chest, broad and warm even through a thin flannel shirt, strong hands gripping her arms with a steadiness that felt almost impossible. Seren looked up. The man was tall, taller than anyone she had met in Port Harlow, taller than anyone she could remember meeting anywhere, with dark hair that curled slightly at his jaw, bare feet planted flat on the cold forest floor, and eyes that stopped her breath entirely. Not brown, not amber, gold. The precise, liquid, impossible gold of sunlight through autumn leaves. And they were looking at her. Not through her, not past her, at her, with an attention that felt like being seen for the very first time. Those eyes moved past her then, up toward the ravine edge above them. Something crossed his face. Authority, she would think later, the quiet kind that does not require words or volume. And the forest went completely still. The growling stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No rustling, No padding of heavy paws. Nothing. "You're safe," the man said. His voice was low and unhurried, carrying the particular patience of someone who had learned stillness from long years of living inside it. "Nothing in these woods will touch you while I'm here." Seren realized she was still gripping the front of his flannel shirt with both fists. She made herself let go, stepped back one careful step. Her scientist's mind catalogued him rapidly and not very helpfully. Approximately 6'2", late 20s or early 30s. No shoes, no jacket despite the 40-degree air. The kind of stillness in his posture that did not come from calm, but from something deeper and older than calm. "What were those animals?" she asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "They won't bother you again." "That's not what I asked." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, the memory of one, maybe. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He crouched beside her without asking, and picked up her field bag from the ground where it had fallen, checked the clasp, handed it back to her. Then he stood and looked at the scrape running along her forearm, where a branch had caught her, examining it with a focused attention that seemed disproportionate for a stranger, like someone taking inventory of something that mattered to them. "It's fine," she said. "It needs cleaning." He lifted his eyes to hers. Up close, the gold of them was even more unsettling, warm and steady, and far too direct. "There's a stream 20 yards east. Come." He turned and walked before she could argue, moving through the underbrush with a silence that made no sense for a man his size. No snapping branches, no displaced stones. He moved like the forest made room for him. Seren followed, because the alternative was standing alone at the bottom of a ravine at dusk, and she had already used up her quota of poor decisions for the day. At the stream, he knelt beside the water and waited. She sat on a root and held out her arm. He cleaned the scrape with water and the hem of his shirt, careful and methodical, his hands large and warm and certain. He did not make small talk. He did not fill the silence with reassurances. He simply did what needed doing. And something about that steadiness made her chest feel strange and tight. "I'm serene," she said, because the silence had tipped into something she needed to interrupt. "I know." He tied a strip of his shirt cuff around the cleaned scrape without looking up. She stared at him. "You know my name. Port Harlow is a small town." He sat back on his heels, finally meeting her eyes again. "You've been researching the North Slope for 3 weeks. People talk. And you are. Caden. Just the one name. Like it was the only one he needed. Like the forest already knew the rest." He stood, and she stood with him, and they were closer than she had registered until that moment, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off him despite the cold air, close enough to notice the way the last light of the afternoon caught in his eyes and turned them from gold to something richer and deeper, and entirely without a name she knew. "Don't come back to this part of the forest alone at night," he said. The arrogance of it startled a response out of her before she could think. "I've been coming to this forest alone for 3 years. "I know that too." His voice held no judgment, only that same unbothered certainty. "Come back during the day. The North Slope especially. Stay on the marked trails after 4 o'clock. You don't get to tell me where I can and can't." "I'm not telling you." He looked at her steadily. "I'm asking." The distinction landed somewhere she hadn't expected it to. She closed her mouth. He held her gaze for one more moment, that impossible gold, that unsettling attentiveness. And then he stepped back, and then he turned, and then he walked into the trees. Seren stood at the edge of the stream and watched the shadows take him. She told herself the strange warmth in her chest was adrenaline. She told herself the way she stood there longer than necessary, watching the place where he had disappeared, was simple disorientation from the fall. She told herself a great many reasonable things on the walk back to the trailhead, none of which explained why she looked back over her shoulder one final time before the tree line broke. He was still there, standing at the edge of the dark, watching her leave, like he couldn't quite make himself stop. She did not sleep well. The ravine kept replaying. Not the fall, not the animals, but the moment of landing. The arms, the warmth, the gold eyes looking down at her with that attention that felt nothing like a stranger's. She lay in the small bed in the rented chalet outside Port Harlow and stared at the cedar ceiling and tried to apply rational explanation to every piece of it. Large dog breeds could reach that shoulder height. The growling had stopped because Caden had made noise she hadn't registered, or because the animals had simply lost interest. The warmth she felt standing close to him was the body's natural response to proximity after a fright. The way he had cleaned her arm with the careful attention of someone who didn't want her to be hurt meant nothing beyond basic human decency. She almost convinced herself. Then she turned onto her side and saw, through the window, the line of trees at the edge of the property, dark and still in the moonlight. And despite every reasonable thought she had just assembled, what she felt looking at those trees was not fear. It was longing. In the morning, she checked the scrape on her arm. The strip of flannel was still tied neatly around it. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, turning her arm over in the early light, thinking about hands that had been careful with her. Then she got up, made coffee, and opened her field notebook to a fresh page. At the top, where the date should have gone, she had written, without remembering writing it, a single word: Caden. She closed the notebook, opened her laptop instead, typed his name into the search bar. The results were sparse: a property registration, a single mention in a local Port Harlow news archive from 8 years ago, something about a land preservation dispute. No social media, no photographs, just the name and the land and the silence around both. Outside, the tree line stood dark against the grey morning sky. She picked up her field bag. She told herself she was going back to the north slope for the fungus specimen. She was already lying to herself, and she knew it. She found him before she found the fungus. He was crouched at the base of a western red cedar, examining something in the bark with the focused patience of someone who had nowhere else to be. He did not look up when she approached, which meant either he hadn't heard her, impossible given the silence of the forest and the volume of her boots on wet leaves, or he had heard her and was simply waiting. She stopped a few feet away. "You knew I'd come back." "I hoped you would." He stood, and he was as tall as she had remembered, and his eyes were exactly the gold she had spent the night trying to convince herself she had exaggerated. He looked at the strip of flannel still tied around her arm. Something settled in his expression. "How is it?" "Fine. It was fine yesterday." She adjusted the strap of her field bag. "I came for the fungus specimen on the north face. I'm not here because you told me to come during the day." "I know. I make my own decisions about where I research." "I know that too." The corner of his mouth moved. That almost smile again, the ghost of one. "I'm glad you're here, Seren." "Adieu." The simplicity of it disarmed her completely. She had prepared for arrogance, for the assumption that she had followed instructions. She had not prepared for gladness, offered quietly and without condition. She cleared her throat. "The cedar," she said, gesturing at the tree he had been examining. "What were you looking at?" He stepped aside so she could see. A cluster of pale formations in the bark, small and intricate, spiral-shaped. She leaned closer, and then closer still, and forgot entirely that she had been preparing to be annoyed with him. "That's—" She reached for her notebook without thinking. "That's Phomitopsis mountsii. But the spiral formation isn't documented in this region. This could be a microclimate variant, she was already writing. How long has it been here? 7 years at least, probably longer. It appears every autumn in the same pattern. She looked up sharply. You've been observing it for 7 years. I observe everything in this forest. He said it without pride, as simple fact. It's my home. She studied him. The easy way he stood among the trees, the way the forest seemed to hold a different quality of stillness around him, the absolute lack of any self-consciousness about being barefoot in 40-degree weather on a carpet of wet leaves. Where exactly do you live? Northeast, about 3 miles in. There's nothing on the maps 3 miles northeast of the Ridge Trail. No, he agreed, there isn't. She waited for more. He offered nothing further, just stood there in the grey morning light, watching her with those gold eyes, patient as the trees themselves. She turned back to the specimen and kept writing. He crouched beside her, not crowding, leaving a careful distance, and watched her work. She had expected it to feel intrusive, being observed like that. Instead, it felt oddly companionable, like working alongside someone who understood that focus was its own kind of conversation. "What do you call this formation?" she asked without looking up. "The spiral." He was quiet for a moment. "The old name for it is a watching ring. The elders said the forest grows in spirals around places that matter, places where something important happened, or will." She stopped writing, looked at him. He was looking at the fungus, not at her, his expression thoughtful and unguarded in a way it hadn't been the day before. "That's beautiful," she said. He looked at her then, and she felt the full weight of those gold eyes, and something moved through her chest that she did not have a scientific name for. "Tell me what you're researching," he said. So she did. She talked about the mycorrhizal network she was mapping, the underground fungal threads that connected the cedar trees into a single communicating system, passing nutrients, signaling stress, functioning as a kind of slow nervous system for the whole forest. She talked about the anomalies she had found on the north slope, the growth patterns that suggested something was disrupting the network, and she talked about what that could mean for the whole ecosystem. He listened with the quality of attention that she had only ever encountered in very good scientists and very still forests, total, unhurried, missing nothing. He did not check his phone. He did not glance away. He asked questions at exactly the right moments, precise questions that revealed a depth of knowledge about this specific forest that no casual observer would have. "You know this territory better than anyone I've ever met," she said finally. "I've had 30 years. He looked around at the trees with an expression she could only describe as love, the unsentimental, clear-eyed love of someone who has chosen something freely and kept choosing it. Every tree, every stream, every season. Why? Why stay so completely in one place? The question landed differently than she had intended. She felt it the moment it left her mouth, saw the slight shift in his posture, something closing that had been open. "Because it's mine," he said after a pause. "And because it needs protecting." She wanted to ask from what. She held the question back, sensing the line she would be crossing, and turned instead to the specimen and began photographing it from 4 angles. They worked side by side for 2 hours. He showed her 3 other formations she had missed, 2 of which were undocumented in her reference database. She showed him what she could see in the growth patterns that he couldn't, the data behind what he already knew intuitively. A strange, easy collaboration built itself out of nothing, out of shared attention and mutual respect, and the particular intimacy of caring about the same things. When the light began to shift toward afternoon, she stood and stretched and looked around and realized with a small shock that she had no idea exactly where she was. He had led her deeper into the forest than she had intended, without her noticing. "I should head back," she said. He stood with her, began walking, and she fell into step beside him naturally, the way you fall into step with someone you have known for a long time. That unsettled her more than anything else, that naturalness. "The spiral formation," she said as they walked, "the watching ring. You believe that? That the forest grows around places that matter?" He considered the question seriously, the way he considered everything. "I believe the forest knows more than we give it credit for. I believe it pays attention." A pause. "I believe some things have a way of finding each other, regardless of maps or plans or intentions." She looked at him sideways. He was looking ahead at the trail. "That's a very unscientific position," she said. "It is," he agreed, without any apparent concern about it. They emerged at the trailhead, and she turned to say goodbye, and realized she had been smiling for the last 20 minutes without noticing. The realization made her stop smiling, which was somehow worse. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. She looked at him, the gold eyes, the quiet certainty, the way he waited for her answer, as if it genuinely mattered. "I'll be here at 8, she said. She walked to her car. She did not look back this time. But she was still smiling when she turned the key in the ignition, and she could not make herself stop. That evening at the only cafe in Port Harlow, a woman with dark, close-cropped hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing set down Seren's coffee with a precision that felt deliberately controlled. "You were in the North Forest today," the woman said. It was not a question. Seren looked up. The woman's name tag said Lyra. Her expression said something much less welcoming than her name. "I've been researching there for 3 weeks, Seren said evenly. "I know." Lyra's eyes moved to the strip of flannel still visible below Seren's sleeve. Her jaw tightened slightly. "You met Caden. Yesterday, we ran into each other." "People don't just run into Caden." Lyra set down the second cup with the same controlled precision. "He doesn't meet people by accident." Seren watched her. "Is there something you want to say to me directly?" Lyra looked at her for a long moment, and Seren had the distinct impression of being measured against a standard she didn't know the terms of yet. "Not yet," Lyra said finally, and walked away. Seren sat alone with her coffee and the fog gathering outside the window, and the certain feeling that she had walked into the middle of a story that had been going on long before she arrived. She was not afraid of that. She was, if she was honest with herself, the opposite of afraid. He was waiting at the trailhead at 7:55, not on the trail. At the trailhead, at the edge where the paved road became gravel, became dirt, became forest, standing with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face turned toward the mountains, as if he had been standing exactly there for hours and intended to stand there for several more. He turned when her car pulled up, and the gold of his eyes was brighter in the morning light than she was prepared for. "You're early," she said, getting out. "So are you." She couldn't argue with that. She had left the chalet 40 minutes ahead of schedule and spent the drive trying to identify the reason without success. They walked the North Trail in the early quiet, the forest still damp from overnight rain, the cedars exhaling fog into the cold air. Their footsteps fell into the same rhythm without discussion. She noticed this and said nothing about it. "I want to ask you something," she said, when they had been walking long enough that the silence had become its own comfortable thing. "And I want you to actually answer." He glanced at her sideways. "All right." "The animals 2 days ago, the ones that were chasing me." She kept her voice level, scientific, which was the tone she used when she needed to be honest without being alarmed. "They stopped the moment you looked at them, not when you shouted, not when you moved toward them, when you looked at them, and they left without a sound." She paused. "Normal animals don't do that." He was quiet for several steps. The forest moved around them in its slow, breathing way. "No," he said finally, "they don't." So what were they? Another pause. Longer this time. Mine, he said. The word landed with a weight that was disproportionate to its size. She turned to look at him. He was looking ahead at the trail, his expression composed and still, offering the answer and leaving the interpretation entirely to her. They belong to you, she said slowly. They belong to this land. I belong to this land. The distinction is smaller than it sounds. She filed that away, carefully, the way she filed away anomalous data in the part of her mind that kept things requiring further investigation. Are they dangerous? To most people, yes. He looked at her then. Not to you. Not anymore. Why not anymore? Because they know you matter to me. The sentence arrived before he could measure it, she thought. She saw it in the slight pause that followed, the almost imperceptible check in his step, as if he had said something truer than he intended. She felt the warmth of it move through her chest and made herself breathe normally. You don't know me, she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. I'm learning you. He looked forward again. That's not the same as not knowing. They reached the north slope and set up her equipment in a wide clearing, and for a while the work was absorbing enough to quiet everything else. He helped without being asked, understanding instinctively which instruments needed steadying and which measurements she needed called out, moving with that same impossible forest silence that still unsettled her no matter how many times she witnessed it. Mid-morning he sat on a fallen log while she photographed a growth cluster, and she felt him watching her work with that total, unhurried attention, and found herself talking. She had not planned to tell him about the engagement. It simply came out, the way things come out when the listener is skilled enough at silence that speaking into it becomes natural. I was engaged, she said, not looking up from the camera. 2 years ago. A colleague, someone I had worked with for 3 years and trusted completely. She adjusted the lens. I found out 6 months before the wedding that he had been using my research, taking credit for my fieldwork in publications and grant applications while I was out here doing the actual work. He had built half a career on findings that were mine. She paused. I ended the engagement. He kept the career. The university said they couldn't confirm attribution without documentation, which I had, but it was long and complicated, and in the end... She lowered the camera. In the end, I just left. I came here. I started over. She had meant to say it clinically. It had not come out clinically. Caden was quiet for a moment. Then, you deserved better than someone who couldn't see you. She turned and looked at him. He was sitting with his forearms resting on his knees, looking at her steadily, and there was nothing performative in the words. No attempt to comfort, no careful navigation of what to say. Just the plain truth of it, offered without decoration. No one had said that to her, not her colleagues, not her family, not the therapist she had seen for 3 months before deciding that being told her anger was valid was not the same as being helped to move past it. No one had simply said, "You deserved better." "Thank you," she said, and her voice came out rougher than she intended. He nodded once and looked back at the trees and gave her the dignity of not making a moment of it. They worked until past noon. On the walk back, the trail was slicker than it had been in the morning, the rain-damp leaves compacted by the warming air into a surface that required attention. She was watching her notebook, rereading a measurement notation, when her boot hit a wet stone at an angle, and the world tilted suddenly sideways. She didn't fall. His hand was at her arm before she had fully registered the slip, not grabbing, not startling, just there, steady and certain, the same way he did everything. She found her footing, and he didn't move his hand for 1 second longer than necessary, and in that second she was very aware of the warmth of his grip through her jacket sleeve and of how close they were standing. She looked up at him. He was looking down at her, and something in his expression had shifted from the composed steadiness of the morning into something unguarded and intent that she did not have a category for. "Caden," she said. "Careful," he said. His voice was lower than usual. The word was ostensibly about the trail. She was fairly certain it was not about the trail. He released her arm slowly, deliberately. She took one step back along the trail and he took one step forward, and the gap between them remained exactly the same. The air had the particular quality of something about to happen or deciding not to. "Tell me something true," she said. She wasn't sure why she said it. "Something you don't tell people." He looked at her for a long moment. "I stopped believing anything was worth coming back to," he said quietly. 2 years ago, something happened that took people from me, and after that, the forest was enough, more than enough. I didn't need anything beyond it." He paused. "I haven't needed anything beyond it until very recently." The honesty of it was almost physical. She felt it in her sternum. "What changed?" she asked, though she already knew the answer in the way you know answers, before you've been given them. In your body, before your mind catches up. "You fell out of the sky," he said, and the ghost of that almost smile returned, softer now, warmer, less ghost than real thing. "I wasn't expecting you." She laughed, surprised, genuine, the kind of laugh that releases something. He watched her laugh with an expression that she would replay later in the chalet, lying awake in the cedar-smelling dark, with something uncomfortable and enormous pressing against the inside of her chest. The expression of a man who has been given something he thought he had finished hoping for. They stood at the trailhead for longer than parting required. The conversation had moved through 3 more topics, and the light was doing complicated things in the canopy above them, and neither of them was making a move to leave. "Tomorrow," he said finally. "Tomorrow," she agreed. She drove back to Port Harlow with the heater going and his voice in her ear. "I wasn't expecting you." And by the time she reached the chalet, she had admitted to herself, quietly and without drama, that something had begun. She didn't know what it was. She knew it was real. That was enough for now to keep moving toward it. The 4th day brought rain. Not the soft Pacific Northwest drizzle that Seren had grown used to in her 3 weeks in Port Harlow, but real rain, cold and determined, sheeting sideways through the trees in a way that made the trail a river, and the clearing where she usually set up her equipment an impossibility. She stood at the edge of the tree line at 8 o'clock and looked at the sky and conceded. Caden was already there. Of course he was. "Not today," he said, looking at the rain with the equanimity of someone who had never found weather particularly troubling. "Obviously not today." She pulled her jacket tighter. "I could drive back to the chalet." "Or," he said, and paused, and she had the impression he was making a decision. "You could come in from the rain." She looked at him. "I have a place," he said. 3 miles northeast. There's a fire." 3 miles northeast, where the maps showed nothing. "All right," she said. She expected to feel uncertain about it. She didn't. He led her off the marked trail and into the forest proper, not the tourist forest of cleared paths and signage, but the real forest, old and layered and full of its own grammar. The rain came down through the canopy in broken patterns, and the cedars smelled of cold water and thyme, and Caden moved ahead of her on no visible trail at all, navigating by some internal map she couldn't access. The house appeared out of the trees gradually, the way structures in deep forest always do, first a suggestion, then a shape, then a reality. It was built from cedar and stone, long and low, with a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides and windows that glowed amber in the rain. It fit the forest the way a tree fits the forest, as if it had grown there rather than been constructed. Inside, warmth. A stone fireplace, taking up most of one wall, already lit. throwing orange light across a room full of books, maps, field notebooks, a long work table covered in what she recognized as systematic observations, pressed specimens, detailed drawings, in a hand that was neither trained nor self-conscious, but simply precise. She stood in the middle of the room and turned slowly, taking it in. "You've been doing this for years," she said, "documenting the forest. 30 years of observations." He had gone to the fire and was adding a log, with the unhurried competence he brought to everything. "My grandfather started it. My father continued it. I kept going. You grew up here. This is the only home I've ever wanted." She moved to the work table and looked at the drawings. The detail was extraordinary. Fungal formations, root systems, seasonal variations in growth, migration patterns of birds and animals, water table measurements taken over decades. It was a lifetime of love rendered in data. "Caden." She turned to look at him. He had straightened from the fire and was watching her with the wariness of someone who had let someone into a private place and was waiting to see if they would be careful with it. "This is remarkable." Something in him released. Not a lot, just a fraction of the held tension, barely visible. But she saw it. "Sit," he said. "I'll make tea." She sat at the work table and he moved in the kitchen that opened off the main room, certain in his own space, quiet, bringing 2 mugs and sitting across from her at the table with the fire at his back. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Outside, the rain intensified briefly and then steadied. "Tell me about 2 years ago," she said. The quiet that followed was different from his usual quiet, weighted in a way she had learned to distinguish. He looked into his mug for a moment. When he looked up, his expression was composed, but something underneath it was not. "The people who live with me on this land, my family, not by blood, but by every other measure. There are 12 of us." He paused. 2 years ago a man came. Someone who had been part of this family once and left badly. He came back with an agenda, access to this territory. There were things he wanted to sell, access he wanted to broker, to people who would have come in and destroyed what 3 generations of my family built. He set down his mug. 3 people were hurt protecting this land. They recovered, but they shouldn't have needed to be hurt at all. His jaw tightened slightly. I was the one who had trusted the man originally, vouched for him, let him close. It was my failure. "It was his choice," Seren said quietly. "The failure to see clearly was mine." His voice held no self-pity, only the flat certainty of a man who had examined the facts and reached a verdict. "I am responsible for what I allow near the people I love. I misjudged. They paid for it." She looked at him across the table. The fire moved behind him. "Carrying guilt like armor doesn't protect anyone," she said. "It just keeps them from getting close enough to help." He went very still. "I know it feels like protection," she continued, not looking away. "Like if you stay vigilant enough, punish yourself enough, you can prevent the next thing. But it doesn't work that way. It just makes you heavier." She paused. "I spent a year after the engagement making everything into a lesson. Every relationship, every conversation, every moment of trust. I turned it into a case study in what I should have seen coming. And I was very safe and very alone, and not one bit less likely to be hurt again." He was looking at her with the expression she was beginning to recognize as the one he had when she said something that reached past the composed surface, unguarded, a little undone. "What changed?" he asked. "I came to a forest." She looked around at the cedar walls, the amber firelight, the 30 years of careful love accumulated on that work table. "I stopped trying to map the danger and started letting myself be here. The rain came down outside. The fire popped and settled." "You're very perceptive," he said. "I observe things for a living." "No." He looked at her steadily. "This isn't observation. This is—" He seemed to search for the word. Presence. You are actually here, Seren. Fully. Most people are somewhere else, even when they're in the room. He paused. I notice it. The way the forest notices a particular kind of light. She felt the warmth of that move through her slowly, from the sternum outward. Caden, she said, and her voice came out softer than she intended. Yes. I'd like to come back here, to this house, if you're willing. He looked at her for a long, unhurried moment. I was going to ask you the same thing, he said. Lyra was at the trailhead when Seren emerged at dusk. She was leaning against a tree with her arms crossed, and when she saw Seren, she pushed off the bark and said, without preamble, "He let you into the house." It wasn't a question. Something in her expression was complicated, not angry, but guarded in a way that held both protectiveness and something that looked, if Seren was reading it right, like the very early stages of reassessment. He did, Seren said. Lyra studied her. What did you see? His work, his history, the thing he carries. Lyra was quiet for a moment. He doesn't let people in, she said finally. Not since... She stopped, started again. He doesn't let people in. I know, Seren said. I was careful with it. Another silence. The trees moved above them in the wet evening air. Good, Lyra said, and walked away. It was not warmth, it was not friendship, but it was a door left open, and Seren had learned lately to recognize the value of doors left open. The fever came on a Thursday. Seren woke at 2 in the morning with her sheets damp and her body burning and the absolute certainty that something was very wrong. The scrape on her arm had been healing cleanly. She had checked it every day. But the cold and the rain and 3 weeks of fieldwork had worn down something in her, and now the world had a quality of unreality that she recognized as high temperature. She reached for her phone. No signal. She tried the chalet's Wi-Fi, down since the storm. Her car was at the Port Harlow garage for new tires. She had dropped it the previous afternoon. She was 3 miles from the nearest neighbor she knew, and her body felt like it was made of sand and heat. She lay back down, told herself it would pass, lay there listening to the rain and the silence and the strange, loud quality that fever gave to everything, the way sounds arrived with too much space around them, too clear, like they were happening very close and very far away at the same time. She drifted, not sleep. Something more translucent than sleep, where thoughts became half-formed and the walls between what was thought and what was said became very thin. Caden's hands, the careful way they had cleaned the scrape at the stream, the warmth of them in 40-degree air. She had noticed the warmth and told herself it was normal body heat, and known even as she told herself that it was something different, something specific to him, a warmth that went past skin temperature into something she didn't have a measurement for. She drifted further. His voice, that unhurried patience in it, the way he said her name. Not the way people usually said her name, clipped or abbreviated or followed immediately by a request. Just Seren, like it was worth taking the space to say, like he had thought about it before speaking. His eyes, the impossible gold, the attentiveness behind it. She had looked into a lot of eyes in her life and never felt looked back at until those ones. I think about you, she murmured to the ceiling of the chalet. I think about you all the time, and I know that's not logical because it's been 4 days and I don't... She stopped, breathed. The ceiling swam slightly. I don't know what this is, but I think about your hands. I think about the way you look at me like I'm something worth looking at. I have not felt like something worth looking at in a very long time. She closed her eyes. Your voice is the quietest thing I've ever heard, and also somehow the loudest. It's the first voice that's gotten inside me in years. I don't know what that means. A pause. I don't know what you are. I know you're not. I know there are things about you that aren't. She couldn't complete the thought, not in words, though her body had known it from the first moment in the ravine, the way her body knew things before her mind caught up. But I don't care. I don't care. I just want to be in the same room as you. I just want you to look at me the way you look at me. She was not aware of the door opening. She was not aware of the sound of the rain changing quality as the cold air moved through the room and then settled again. She was not aware of quiet footsteps or the specific gravity of a presence she had learned to recognize even in sleep. She was aware of a hand on her forehead. The warmth of it was exactly what she had been describing to the ceiling. Different, specific, unmistakable. She opened her eyes. Caden was crouching beside the bed, his hand on her forehead, his gold eyes moving over her face with the focused inventory of someone determining severity. He had rain on his jacket. He had come through the storm. "You're here," she said. "Yes." "How did you know?" He took his hand from her forehead and moved it to her wrist, 2 fingers at her pulse point, counting. "I knew," he said simply. She would think about that answer later. Now she was too warm and too relieved to interrogate it. "I think I said things," she said carefully, "before you came in, out loud." He kept his eyes on her wrist. "You didn't say anything I didn't already know." She stared at him. He looked up and met her eyes, and what was there was not embarrassment and not pity, and not the cautious distance she might have expected. It was the same gold steadiness, and layered inside it, something new, something open and carefully offered, like a window found unlocked. "I'll make tea," he said, standing. He spent the night. She drifted in and out while he moved quietly through the chalet. She heard him in the kitchen, smelled herbs she couldn't identify, something green and sharp and faintly sweet. He brought her tea in a mug with both hands warm around it and sat in the chair beside the bed, and when she couldn't hold the mug, he held it for her, steady and patient. When the fever spiked at 4 in the morning and she shook under 2 blankets, his hand found hers under the covers and held it. No explanation, no ceremony, just held it, his warmth moving through the grip into her, and she held back and felt the shaking ease. "Don't leave," she said. She wasn't sure if she was asleep or awake. "I'm here," he said. His thumb moved across her knuckles, slow and certain. "I'm not going anywhere." She slept. When she woke, the fever had broken. The room was grey with early light and smelled of cedar and rain and those unidentified herbs, and Caden was asleep in the chair beside her bed. She lay still and watched him for a long time. In sleep, the composed steadiness of his waking face softened into something that was unmistakably younger, more unguarded. A face that had not always worn that careful stillness, that had learned it as a response to something. His hands were loose in his lap, open. Even asleep, he was turned toward her. Toward the door, too, she noticed. His chair was angled so that both she and the entrance were in his peripheral vision. Even unconscious, he was keeping watch. A feeling moved through her that was larger than anything she had a name for. Not just the warmth of attraction, not just the relief of being cared for. Something older and quieter and more certain than both. She sat up slowly. He woke the moment she moved. "You stayed," she said. "I couldn't leave." He said it directly, looking at her, and there was something in his voice that made it clear it was true in more than one sense. She looked at him across the small distance of the room. The light was coming up outside, and birds were starting somewhere in the cedars, and everything felt very clean and very real, the way mornings felt after long nights. "Thank you," she said, "for coming, for staying, for—" She stopped. "For all of it." He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly conversational. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Better." She meant it in more ways than one. He nodded once and stood, and reached out without thinking and tucked a piece of hair back from her face. The same gesture from their first night, but slower now, more deliberate, his fingers just barely brushing her cheek before he withdrew. He looked at what he had done with a faint expression of surprise at himself. She didn't say anything. She simply watched him and let the moment be what it was. He made breakfast. She sat at the small table wrapped in a blanket and ate it, and they talked about nothing urgent. About the birds outside the window, about the fungal specimens, about a book on mycorrhizal networks she had recommended and he had apparently already read. Easy talk. The kind that meant something exactly because it meant nothing in particular. When he left at noon, she stood on the porch and watched him go. "Tomorrow?" she called. He turned at the tree line, those gold eyes across the distance. "Tomorrow," he said. She went back inside and sat down at the table and placed both hands flat on the surface and admitted to herself, with the clarity of someone who has been given something unexpected and extraordinary and needs to acknowledge it before it becomes complicated, she was falling in love with him. It was not a comfortable feeling. It was enormous and a little frightening and completely beyond her control. But it was real. It was the realest thing she had felt in years. She picked up her field notebook and opened it to a fresh page and wrote at the top, in her careful scientific hand, Day 18. Fever broken. Something else beginning. He arrived at 7:30 with coffee. The right coffee. Made the right way. Strong. No sugar. A small pour of the oat milk she kept in the chalet refrigerator, whose existence she had never mentioned to him. She stood at the door in her field clothes and looked at the mug, and then looked at him. "How do you know how I take my coffee?" The ghost smile. "I pay attention." She took the mug. "That's either very thoughtful or mildly alarming." "Probably both," he said. "Ready?" She had been ready since 6:15, but she was not going to tell him that. The forest was different that morning. The storm had washed everything down to a new brightness, the greens impossibly vivid, the air carrying a quality of clarity that felt earned. They walked without particular agenda, which was new. The previous days had always had the structure of work. Today felt more like permission. She had been careful since the fever. Careful in the way she was careful when she became aware she was in dangerous territory. Methodical, observant, moving slowly so as not to disturb. She did not bring up what she had said in the delirium. He did not bring it up either. But between them, there was something different now, a changed landscape that neither of them was pretending hadn't changed. "I want to show you something," he said, after an hour of walking that had taken them farther northeast than she had been before. "It requires about 20 more minutes, and you won't believe me when I tell you what it is, so I'd rather just show you." "Tell me anyway." The elders called it moss fire. He navigated a root cluster without looking down. "I don't have a better name for it." She turned the word over. Moss fire. It pulled at something, a resonance she couldn't locate. "What is it?" "Come and see." The clearing opened without warning. The trees thinned, and then there was simply sky and space, and the ground was covered entirely in a moss she had never seen in any field guide or specimen catalogue, thick and deep and richly green, ordinary in every way except. "It's dawn for another 12 minutes, Caden said quietly beside her. "Watch the eastern edge." She watched. The light shifted. She had watched light shift in forests for 10 years and knew every variation. The way morning moved differently in cedar canopies than in fir. The way water changed refraction near streams. The way fog diffused ultraviolet at different altitudes. She thought she knew light. The eastern edge of the moss began to glow. Not reflected light. Not bioluminescence, which she had seen and which had a different quality entirely. This was the moss itself, warming, brightening, the green deepening into orange, into something between copper and fire, a colour that existed in autumn leaves and nowhere else. It spread inward from the edges slowly, the whole carpet of it alive with this impossible warmth, and the light it threw was the same light that came through canopy at golden hour, but from below, coming up from the ground. Seren stopped breathing. After the 12 minutes, the light began to ease, softening back through amber to the ordinary green of a Pacific Northwest morning. And then it was just moss again, just a clearing in the forest, unremarkable and extraordinary and completely without scientific category. She became aware, slowly, that she was standing with one hand pressed to her sternum. "What just happened?" she said. It was not entirely a question. Every clear morning, when the angle of the dawn light catches this clearing at the right degree, the moss reflects the spectrum back. He was watching her, not the clearing. She could feel his attention on her face. "The angle lasts about 12 minutes, then it's gone until tomorrow. That's not in any—" She stopped, breathed. "That's not documented anywhere. No field guide, no spectral analysis. No one comes here." She turned to look at him. He was watching her with that open expression, the one she had seen in his house by the fire, the one that appeared when she said something that reached past the surface. But now it was fuller, warmer. He looked like a man who had brought someone to the most important place he knew and watched them see it properly for the first time. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because you look at the forest the way I look at the forest," he said. "And I wanted you to see the thing I love most about it." A pause. "And because—" he stopped, started again. "Because when you are here, in this specific place, I want to be the one standing next to you." She looked at him for a long time. The clearing around them was ordinary green now, calm and still, and somewhere above them a wren was making an extremely small sound about something, and the cedars breathed their cold morning breath, and Seren felt something very large and very quiet settle inside her chest like a thing that had been traveling a long time and had finally arrived at the right place. She sat down on the moss. He sat beside her, not touching. The distance was careful, voluntary, loaded. "Tell me something true," she said. It was their phrase now, she realized, the question that belonged to them. "I don't know what to do with you," he said quietly. Not complaint, not distress, honest statement, offered simply. "I have spent 2 years with no room in my life for anything but this land and the people on it. And then you fell out of the sky, and now I think about you when you're not here. And I—" He stopped. His jaw tightened slightly, not against emotion, but with the effort of being precise. "I think about you a great deal, more than makes sense for someone I have known for 5 days. 12 days, she said. He looked at her. "I've been counting from the day I first came to this section of the forest," she said, "before we met, because I already felt like I was walking toward something." He absorbed that in silence for a moment. "Tell me something true," he said. She looked at the ordinary moss and thought about the fire that lived inside it. "I have spent 3 years making myself very competent and very armored and very alone. I became excellent at being alone. I turned it into a skill." She paused. "And then I fell into your arms, and you held me with both hands, and I felt—" She stopped, said it anyway. "I felt like I was allowed to be here, like I had permission to take up space. I haven't felt that in so long I had forgotten it was a feeling that existed." He reached out and took her hand. Just that. No further move, no escalation, just her hand held in both of his with that warmth that was different from normal warmth and the steadiness that was the most reliable thing she had found in years. She looked down at their hands, then up at him. "I'm falling in love with you," she said, directly, scientifically. Because she was a scientist, and because she didn't see the point of dressing it in anything else. I think you should know that. I don't know what it means for whatever this is, but I thought you should know. The gold of his eyes changed, deepened, warmed, moved in a way that reminded her of the moss at dawn. "Seren," he said. "Yes. I'm going to need to tell you something about who I am." His hand tightened slightly around hers. "Something that changes the context of everything. And I need you to know that I'm going to tell you because you just told me the truth, and you deserve the same." She felt something tighten and then release in her chest. "Okay," she said, and she held his hand back. "I'm listening." He did not tell her everything that day. He told her enough. He told her that his family, the 12 people who lived on the Wolfland, who had grown up here or come here and stayed, who were linked to each other and to this territory by something deeper than address or habit, were different. That the land had been theirs for 4 generations because they were capable of protecting it in ways that ordinary property law could not replicate. That the animals in the forest were not simply animals. He did not use specific words. He said, "We are part of this forest in ways I will need to show you rather than tell you." He said, "What you have felt since the first day, the rightness of this place, the sense of being recognized here, that is not coincidence." He said, "I am asking you to hold what I've told you for 1 more day, and then I will show you, and you can decide." She sat with it on the drive back to Port Harlow. She sat with it that evening in the chalet. She was, by training and by nature, a woman who held anomalous data carefully, who did not jump to conclusions, who kept the category of unexplained open until explanation arrived. She had a great deal of unexplained data by now, the animals that retreated from a look, the warmth that came off him in temperatures that should have required a coat, the way the forest changed quality in his presence, stiller, more attentive, as if something large was paying attention. The way he had known she was sick before she had been able to reach anyone. The way he had come through the storm, as if guided. She sat with all of it and found that when she was honest, she had already known. Not the details, not the shape, but the essential fact of it. That he was something her training didn't have a category for, and that it had not made her afraid even once. The following morning, he took her to a part of the land she had not been. The deep interior, past the 3 miles, past the house, past any trail. She followed him through old-growth forest, the trees enormous and ancient and full of their own breathing, and into a space that felt like a room, naturally formed, ringed by fallen cedar, open to the sky. He turned to face her. "I need to show you before I can say more," he said. "I know," she said. The change, when it came, was described in the years after by Seren, in ways that consistently frustrated the precise part of her brain, because it was not a thing the precise part of the brain was built to hold. What she remembered was not a sequence of events, but a feeling, the air shifting as if making room for something, a presence, vast and gold-eyed and ancient, filling the clearing. And then Caden again, standing in the same place, looking at her with the same expression he always had, and the space around him settling back to ordinary. She stood very still for a long time. "Okay," she said finally. He watched her. "Okay," she said again, and took a breath, and took a step forward. He went completely still, like he was waiting for something he had stopped expecting. She reached out and took his hand, same as she had done in the clearing the day before. Steady, deliberate, certain. "I have 100 questions," she said, starting with the mycorrhizal implications of a species that is physiologically distinct but ecologically integrated at this level, which is genuinely extraordinary from a network perspective. But those are for later. She paused. "Are you all right?" He stared at her. "You're asking if I'm all right," he said. "You just showed me something that required a great deal of trust. Yes, I'm asking if you're all right." Something happened to his expression that she had not seen before, something that bypassed the composed surface entirely and arrived directly at whatever lived underneath it. He looked like a man who had been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and had just been offered help with it. "I didn't know if you would stay," he said. His voice was quieter than usual. "I told you yesterday I was falling in love with you," she said. "I meant it then. I still mean it now. Being right about you feeling different is not a reason to stop meaning it." He exhaled slowly. His hand closed around hers. "There is something else I need to tell you," he said. "About what I felt the moment I held you in the ravine. About what has been happening to me since then. Something my kind calls a bond. I want to explain it properly with full honesty about what it means before anything else happens between us." She tilted her head. "Is it biological?" "It is, in the sense that it is real and physical and irreversible once. Is it like a chemical signal, a pheromone response?" "It is nothing like a chemical signal, but biologically." "Seren." A pause. "Stop." She looked at him. He was looking at her with an expression hovering somewhere between helpless and amused, and the ghost smile had become an almost smile, and the almost smile was becoming something else entirely. "I would like to explain the most profound and ancient form of connection my entire existence has a name for," he said carefully, "without it being turned into a thesis." She pressed her lips together to keep the smile back. Failed. "I'm a scientist. This is how I process things." "I know." And there it was, a real smile, fully present, not a ghost or an almost, but the actual thing, warm and a little rueful, and entirely directed at her. It transformed his face into something she wanted to look at for the rest of her life. "You're smiling," she said. "You noticed." "I've been trying to make that happen since day one." He laughed. It was low and surprised, like someone who had forgotten they could, and it was the best sound she had ever heard in a forest full of extraordinary sounds. He told her about the bond on the walk back to his house, properly, carefully, with the precision she had come to expect from him. He told her that she was his, not in the possessive sense that owned, but in the elemental sense that recognized, that his body had known her before his mind caught up, that the pull toward her was not choice but truth, and that truth asked nothing of her she was not willing to give. He told her that the choice was entirely hers, that there was no pressure inside the bond toward anything she did not choose, that he would wait as long as she needed, weeks, months, years, because what he felt was not urgency, but certainty, and certainty was patient by nature. She listened to all of it walking beside him through the old trees. When he finished, she said, "What does it feel like, on your end, when I'm near you?" He considered the question for a moment with the seriousness he gave to all questions worth asking. "Like the forest at dawn," he said. "When the light is exactly right and every living thing in it is awake and paying attention, and there is nothing in the world but this specific moment and the understanding that it is exactly what it is supposed to be." He paused, "like coming home to somewhere you didn't know existed until you arrived." She walked beside him in silence for a few steps. "That's what the moss fire feels like," she said. "From outside, when I'm watching you." He stopped walking. She stopped too and turned, and found him looking at her with the full force of those gold eyes, and for a moment the space between them had the quality of the clearing at dawn, charged, alive, on the edge of the extraordinary. "Seren?" he said. "Yes," she said, not as an answer to a question, as something more open than that. He took a step toward her. She did not step back. The distance between them became very small and very significant, and the light came through the canopy at the angle that had been following them all day, warm and gold and specific. His hand came up to her face, the same gesture again, the fingers at her cheek, but this time he did not withdraw. He held her face in his hand and looked at her with the expression she had been cataloguing for 12 days and still had no name for, and she let herself be held in it. "I need to tell you one more thing first," he said quietly, "about a man named Derek Strand, and what I've been keeping from you." The warmth in her chest did not disappear, but it tensed. "Tell me," she said. They sat in his kitchen. It was becoming her favorite room. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, in the way that functional spaces built with care are beautiful, all warm cedar and well-used surfaces, but because it was where he became most himself. The composed steadiness of the forest Caden gave way here to something more human, small movements of concentration, the particular way he held a mug, the habit of looking out the window at the trees every few minutes as if checking that they were still there. He told her about Derek Strand without preamble. 2 years ago, Derek had come to the Wolfland, claiming to want to return, to be different from when he had left. Caden had believed him because Caden had wanted to believe him. Because Derek had once been family, and the hope of family returned is a powerful thing. He had given Derek access, trusted him with information about the land's legal boundaries and ecological classifications. Derek had taken that information and used it to begin building a case for reclassifying the territory, opening it to outside access, effectively dismantling the protections the Wolf family had maintained for 4 generations. 3 people had been hurt when the deception became clear, and the confrontation that followed was not clean. Derek had been removed. The case had been abandoned. But 2 years later, Derek Strand was back in Port Harlow. "I knew he was here when you arrived," Caden said. 3 days before we met. "I knew he had arranged for a researcher to be placed in this region, arranged the grant funding, steered the university toward this specific territory." He looked at his mug. "I knew the researcher was you before I met you." Seren was very still. "You knew I had been put here by him," she said. "Yes." "And you didn't tell me?" "No." He set the mug down. "I needed to know if you were part of it. If you were complicit. I watched you work for 3 days before the ravine. Your methods, your documentation, the integrity of your process. I already believed you weren't. But I needed to be certain before I let you close." "So you were investigating me," she said. Her voice was careful, scientific, the way she used it when she was managing something. "Yes." He met her eyes directly. "I was wrong not to tell you sooner. I told myself I was protecting my family. The truth is, I was also—" A pause. "The composed surface showed a fracture. By the time I was certain of you, I was already— what I felt for you had already made it difficult to—" He stopped, steadied. "I was afraid that if I told you, you would leave, and I wanted you to stay." Silence in the kitchen. The window showed the trees, still and grey in the afternoon light. Seren turned her mug in her hands. She felt the shape of it, the betrayal, the justification, the fear underneath the justification. She felt it clearly, holding it up to the light of every piece of information she had. "What does Derek want with the research I've been doing?" she asked. "Your data documents 3 endemic species in the North Quadrant that aren't listed on the Federal Protection Registry. With your signature, an independent scientist with a verified institutional affiliation, he can file for expedited ecological review. It would open access to the land for outside assessment within 30 days, during which time people come into this land who should not come here, who would not stop at the land itself." His jaw tightened. "My family would be in danger." She thought about the 12 people who lived on this land. The family by choice, by loyalty, by something that ran deeper than blood. She thought about Lyra at the trailhead, arms crossed, protecting what she loved, with the fierceness of someone who had already lost and was not going to lose again. "What do you need from me?" she said. He looked up. "Your data," she said. "The specimens I've catalogued, the network maps, the species documentation, all of it. I can add the missing endemic species to the registry directly. I have the institutional standing to file for immediate federal protection classification. It would make Derek's reclassification application moot before he files it." Caden looked at her for a long moment. "You don't have to do that," he said quietly. "This isn't your fight. It became my fight when he used my name to start it." She held his gaze. "And it became my fight when you became mine." The word landed between them, a quiet declaration. "I was honest with you about being afraid you would leave," he said. "I should have been honest sooner. I'm sorry I wasn't. I know why you weren't." She didn't look away. "And I understand it. But I need to know, going forward, that you'll tell me things. The difficult things, the things that affect both of us, not just the ones that feel safe." "Yes," he said without hesitation, "and I'll do the same." She paused. "I have not always been brave about honesty. I learned to keep things back when I was with someone who used them against me. I'm still unlearning that." He leaned forward across the table. His hand came to rest over hers. "We can be clumsy about it together," he said. "Learning how to trust someone new is always clumsy at the start." She looked at his hand over hers, the warmth of it. "It's worth being clumsy for," she said. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the cedars with that sound she had been hearing for 12 days now and had already begun to associate with safety. He stood and came around the table, and she stood too, and they were very close in the small, warm space, and she put her hand flat on his chest and felt his heartbeat, fast, not hidden, honest, and looked up at him. "Caden," she said. "Yes." His voice was low. "I'm not going anywhere." His arms came around her then, careful and certain both, and she leaned into the warmth of him that was different from normal warmth, and his chin came down to rest on the top of her head, and they stood like that in the cedar-smelling kitchen while the light moved across the floor. He held her like she was something that had come to him across a very long distance. She let herself be held like that. Outside, the forest held its breath and paid attention. She filed the federal protection petition that same evening. It took 4 hours, and the kind of focus that required her to keep setting aside the feeling of Caden's arms around her in the kitchen, because the feeling was enormous and distracting, and she would give it its proper attention once the practical thing was done. She catalogued every endemic species she had documented in the past 3 weeks. 37 species, 6 of which did not appear on any existing federal registry, and filed them with the U.S. Forest Service under emergency ecological designation, attaching her institutional credentials and 12 days of field data. The confirmation arrived at 11:17 p.m., review period initiated. Access restrictions in place pending assessment. She sat in the chalet with her laptop open and the confirmation on the screen, and felt the particular satisfaction of having used the tools available to her precisely and well. Derek Strand had built his plan on the assumption that her data would work for him. He had not counted on the person generating the data. She called the number Caden had given her. He answered before the second ring. "It's filed," she said. "Emergency designation. The territory is protected pending federal review. His reclassification application will be rejected the moment it's submitted." A long silence on the other end. Then, "Seren, I know. How can I? You don't need to. It was my data, and my name, and my decision." She paused. "And I wanted to." She heard him exhale. It was not a small sound. It was the sound of something releasing. "Get some sleep," he said. "Come to the forest in the morning." She slept better than she had in weeks. In the morning, Lyra was at the trailhead again. This time, she was not leaning against a tree with arms crossed. She was standing on the path, and when Seren pulled up and got out of the car, Lyra said, without preamble, "I heard what you did last night. News travels fast. On this land, it does." Lyra studied her. Her expression had lost the calculated wariness that had been its resting state every time they'd spoken. Not warm. Lyra, Seren suspected, was not warm by default, but open in a way it hadn't been. That was a pause. "Thank you." "You don't need to thank me." "No," Lyra said. "I do." Another pause, and in the pause was everything Lyra was not saying. The weight of 2 years of protecting what she loved, the cost of keeping watch, the relief of having someone stand alongside instead of require protection from. "He's in the northwest clearing. He'll hear you coming." She started to walk away, stopped, turned back. "You're not what I expected," she said. "When I heard a researcher had come, I expected someone who would take things and leave, like the others." A beat. "You stayed, after everything." She met Serene's eyes. "That means something here." She walked away into the trees. Seren stood for a moment with the weight of it. Then she followed the path northwest. She heard the clearing before she saw it, a quality of openness in the sound, the way space changed the air. She emerged into a wide meadow at the northwest edge of the wolfland, autumn grass golden and bent in the morning wind, and found Caden standing in the middle of it, with his face tilted up toward the sky. He turned when he heard her. His expression in that unguarded first second, but before he had time to arrange it into the composed steadiness, was simply joy. Clear, uncomplicated, genuine. She walked across the meadow to him. "Lyra talked to me," she said. "I know." She said I'm not what she expected." "No." Something warm moved in his eyes. "You are considerably more." She was close enough now that she had to look up at him, the gold of his eyes very bright in the morning light, and the feeling in her chest was large and clear and not frightening anymore. "Tell me what the bond feels like right now," she said. "This moment." He looked at her for a long moment. "Like standing in the moss fire clearing," he said quietly. "Like the light is exactly right. Like everything in this forest is awake and paying attention, and there is nothing in the world but you, here, looking at me like that." She reached up and put her hand against his jaw. He went completely still, the way he went still when something mattered, not frozen, but fully present, every part of him attending. "I have been running from things my whole life," she said. "My family's expectations, that engagement, the version of myself that was built for someone else. I came to this forest to stop running and figure out what I was running toward." She looked at him steadily. "I think it was this. I think it was you." He turned his face slightly into her hand. Such a small movement. So completely unguarded. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Ask. The bond, if you choose it, if we—" He paused, finding precision. "It is permanent. I want you to know that not as a condition or a pressure, but because you deserve full information. It will change you in small ways. Your connection to this land, to these people, to me. It cannot be undone. And I would not ask it of you until you were entirely certain." "How will I know when I'm entirely certain?" "You'll know," he said simply. "The way you know the things that matter, in your body before your mind." She looked at him. The morning around them was very still, the meadow holding the particular silence of something about to happen. "I'm already certain," she said. "Seren." "I know what I know," she said, with the calm of someone who has examined data from every angle and reached a conclusion. I know what I have felt since the ravine. I know what it felt like to watch you in the moss fire clearing. I know what it meant when you held my hand through a fever and stayed until morning." She paused. "I am a scientist. I take evidence seriously. The evidence is overwhelming." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not the ghost, not the almost, but the full thing, that rare and transforming smile, and took her face in both hands, careful and certain both, and leaned down and kissed her. It was nothing like she expected, and entirely what she had known it would be. Warm, unhurried, certain in exactly the way he was certain about everything. No performance, no escalation, just the truth of it, offered directly. She put her hands against his chest and felt his heartbeat and kissed him back with the same honesty. And the meadow held them, and the cedars leaned in, and the morning went gold. When they drew apart, she kept her hands against his chest and looked up at him. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said back, and his voice was rougher than usual, and his hands were still in her hair, and he was looking at her with that expression, the one she was going to spend the rest of her life trying to deserve. "So," she said, "what happens now?" "Now," he said, "you come home." Coming home, as it turned out, was a process. Not a complicated one, not painful, but a process nonetheless. The kind of gradual shifting that happened when two lives that had been moving separately began moving in the same direction, slowly aligning the way rivers align when they reach the same valley. Seren kept the chalet for 3 weeks after the meadow, not out of hesitation. She was not hesitating, had not been hesitating since the ravine, if she was honest, but because she understood that belonging somewhere new required time spent consciously arriving. You didn't simply move into a forest. You let the forest accept you. She spent her mornings in the field, her afternoons at Caden's house, her evenings sometimes at the chalet and sometimes not. The research continued. It was good research, independent of everything else, and she was not going to abandon it because her personal life had become remarkable. If anything, the mycorrhizal data was improving. The network maps were more detailed than anything she had produced before, informed now by Caden's 30 years of accumulated knowledge and the access to the deep interior that had never been on any map. The Wolf family, the 12 people of this land, received her with varying speeds. Most were straightforward about it. There was a couple in their 40s, Renner and Dax, who had been on the land since before Caden took stewardship, and who treated her acceptance of the truth about what they were with the practical approval of people who have lived a long time and seen rare things and know what rare things look like. There was a younger man, Colt, barely 20, who followed her through the forest one afternoon, asking questions about mycorrhizal networks with an intensity that reminded her of herself at that age, and whom she began bringing field notes home for because he was genuinely brilliant and the forest was wasted on him as a library. There was Lyra. Lyra did not shift immediately to warmth. She would not have been Lyra if she had. But she shifted to something that was, in its own register, more meaningful than warmth. She shifted to respect. She stopped watching Seren the way she had in the beginning, as a thing requiring monitoring, and started watching her the way she watched the rest of the family, checking that she was all right, that she had what she needed, that the land was treating her as it should. The shift crystallized on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks after the meadow. Serene was at the work table in Caden's house, building out a map overlay that would show the mycorrhizal network in relation to the Wolfland boundaries, when Lyra came in through the back door with the unceremonious directness she used to enter all rooms. She looked at the map, sat down across from Seren without being invited. "The southwest corridor," she said, pointing at a section of the map. "There's a break in the network here that Caden has been worried about for 2 seasons. Do you see it?" Seren looked. She saw it. "The growth patterns suggest something interrupted the connection here, maybe 3 years ago." Derek's people, Lyra said flatly. They came through that corridor. Before we stopped them. A pause. Can it be repaired? The network? Yes. It will take several seasons and the right fungal introduction at specific nodes, but yes. Seren paused. Do you want me to put together a remediation plan? Lyra looked at her for a long moment. Yes, she said, and then, quieter, with the quality of someone delivering something they have been carrying for a while. The land knows you. I've watched it since you came. It accepts you, in the way it accepts the people who belong here. She looked at the map, not at Seren. That doesn't happen with outsiders. In 30 years I have not seen it happen once. A pause. I don't fully understand it, but I trust it. Seren was quiet for a moment. I don't understand it either, she said honestly, but I feel it. Since the first day on the North Slope, before the ravine, before Caden, something in this forest recognized me. She paused. I think I've been walking toward this land my whole life and didn't know it. Lyra looked at her then. Something in her expression was still and careful and almost moved. The old families say the land calls its people home, she said. Not the ones it needs, the ones it loves. The kitchen held that for a moment. Welcome home, Lyra said. Her voice was dry and practical and the opposite of ceremonial, but the words themselves were entirely genuine. Seren felt them settle in her chest like a key turning. Derek Strand's application was formally rejected by the U.S. Forest Service 11 days after Seren filed the emergency designation. The endemic species classifications she had submitted triggered an automatic protection review that rendered any reclassification petition moot for a minimum of 5 years. His organization's federal contracting status was flagged for audit based on the documentation she provided, showing the manipulated grant steering. He left Port Harlow on a Thursday, without speaking to anyone. Caden told her on a Friday morning, standing in the kitchen with coffee, as if reporting ordinary news. It's over, she asked. The immediate threat. There will be others over time. There always are. He handed her the mug. But this one is finished. She held the mug and looked at him, at the ease in his posture that had not been there 3 weeks ago. The weight he had been carrying for 2 years, distributed now, shared, no longer entirely his alone. How are you? She asked. He considered the question with his usual precision. I am the best I have been in 2 years, he said, because of you, because of what you did. Because... He set down his own mug and came to stand in front of her, and took the mug from her hands and set it down too, and took her face in both hands the way he had in the meadow. Because you are here, she put her hands over his. I'm here, she said, simple and true. He kissed her forehead, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. Slow, deliberate, each one a separate thing. She turned her face up to his, and he met her properly, and the kitchen was warm, and the forest outside was breathing, and the family that lived in it was there and alive and safe. And she was home. Autumn deepened toward winter on the wolfland, with the patience of something that had done this many times before. The cedars shifted from their summer dark to something richer, the undergrowth pulling back and revealing the architecture of the forest, the enormous root systems, the layered canopy, the way the land breathed differently without its green cover. Seren walked it every day and found new things every day and stopped being surprised by that, because the forest, she had learned, had no bottom. It simply kept going. She moved the rest of her things from the chalet on a Saturday in November. Not dramatically, not with ceremony. She had 3 boxes and a field equipment case and a plant that had been living on the chalet windowsill that she was unreasonably attached to. Caden helped her carry it in and found a window in the house that got the right light for the plant without being asked, because he had noticed, weeks before, how she checked on it every morning. That evening, Renner made dinner for all 12 of them, crowded around the long table in the main house, the fire going, the forest outside in its dark winter patience. Seren sat between Caden and Colt and listened to the particular noise of a family that had chosen itself, the overlapping conversations, the running jokes she was beginning to understand, the specific vocabulary of people who had lived alongside each other through hard things and come out the other side intact. Lyra across the table caught her eye at one point, raised her glass a fraction. Serene raised hers back. Colt showed her 3 drawings he had done of the mycorrhizal network after reading her field notes, which were remarkable. He had an intuitive grasp of the network topology that years of training had not given her, just given him naturally. She told him so, directly, the way she wished someone had told her things directly when she was 20. He looked at her with the uncomfortable intensity of someone receiving a compliment they weren't sure how to hold. "You're the first person who's talked to me about this like it matters," he said. "It does matter," she said. "You're going to be extraordinary at this, if you want to be." She thought about her father, briefly and without the old pain, the voice that had told her she was wasting her time in the field, that real science happened in laboratories, that she was too singular and too strange for the work. She thought about how long she had carried that voice, how much lighter she was without it. After dinner, Caden found her on the back porch, looking out at the winter tree line, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. "You're thinking," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I'm always thinking. You're thinking about something specific." He looked at the trees with her. "What is it?" She considered. "I called my father last week. I hadn't spoken to him since I came here." A pause. "He asked when I was coming home. I told him I was already home." She paused again. "He didn't understand what I meant. He's probably still waiting for me to come back to something that makes sense to him." She turned to look at Caden. "I don't feel guilty about it. I thought I would, but I don't. Is that strange to you?" "A little. I spent a long time trying to earn his understanding." She leaned her shoulder against his arm. "I think I stopped needing it somewhere between the fever and the meadow. Somewhere in there I became complete without it." He put his arm around her. "You were always complete," he said. "You just needed a forest that knew it." She laughed softly. "That's either the most beautiful thing or the most arboreal thing anyone has ever said to me." "Probably both," he said, and she could hear the smile in it. They stood on the porch in the cold, and she leaned into his warmth, and the forest was there, dark and enormous and absolutely full of attention, the old trees breathing their slow breath, the land holding everything it contained with the particular care of something that has loved a long time and intends to keep loving. "I need to show you something," he said. "Tonight, if you're willing." She looked up at him. "The moss fire clearing," he said, "on a full moon. I've never shown it to anyone. I want to show it to you." Her chest did the thing it did, the warmth, the certainty, the feeling of something arriving. "Yes," she said. They walked to the clearing past midnight, through forest that was different under the full moon, silvered and ancient, the cedars transformed by the light into something that looked very old and very awake. Caden moved beside her, his hand warm in hers, the silence between them the kind that had been built over weeks into something completely comfortable, completely inhabited. The clearing under the moon was extraordinary, not the moss fire. That was a dawn phenomenon, waiting for its own time. But the moon fell into the open space of the clearing and lit the moss to silver, and the cedars ringed it like witnesses, and the sky above was full of cold winter stars. And the whole thing had a quality that Seren had given up trying to name scientifically because some things were not improved by naming. They stood in the middle of it. Caden turned to face her. In the moonlight, his gold eyes were silver, and the expression on his face was the one she had been cataloguing for weeks, and now knew completely. the one that was not composed or controlled, but simply true. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what it means to find the thing you were meant to love, and then to have it choose you back." She waited. "I have been thinking about the fact that you fell out of the sky and into my arms and were not afraid of me." His voice was very quiet. "And that you stayed when you could have left, and that you stood in this clearing at dawn and looked at the moss fire with the same face I must have the first time I saw it, and that you took my family's land and protected it with your name and your data and your professional standing, not because I asked, but because it was right." He paused. "And that every day since the ravine has been clearer and more real than any day before it." She looked at him across the silver clearing. "I love you," he said, simply, directly, with the same quality he gave to all true things. "I love you, and I would like, with your complete willingness and no pressure from me and at whatever pace is yours, to spend every season forward proving that this is exactly what it is." She stood in the moonlight for a moment, just holding the sentence. "I love you too," she said. "I have been trying to find the right moment to say it properly, and then I realized you were never going to give me a bad moment to say it in, because that's who you are, so—" She paused. "I love you. I am completely certain. I am not going anywhere." He crossed the clearing in 2 steps and held her face in his hands and kissed her, the full moon above them, the forest around them, the moss fire sleeping under their feet, waiting for dawn. And she kissed him back, with the entirety of what she was, and the land knew it. The forest paid its particular quality of attention. The cedars held their breath and then released it in a long, slow exhalation that moved through the whole canopy like a sigh, like recognition, like welcome. Winter on the Wolfland was its own country, not the grey, enduring winter of cities, the winter of infrastructure and heating bills and light deprivation. This was the Pacific Northwest's version. Dark, yes, and cold, and relentless in its reign, but alive in ways that the green seasons concealed. The fungi were extraordinary in winter. The mycorrhizal network pulsed with data she had never had access to before. The forest in its dormancy was not sleeping but redistributing, the underground threads carrying nutrients and signals in patterns more complex than anything she had mapped in the summer. She spent 3 weeks rebuilding the Southwest Corridor. It required physical work, the introduction of specific fungal nodes at intervals along the break, careful placement, daily monitoring. She did it herself, with Colt alongside learning the process, both of them in the cold and mud of the deep forest, working with the quiet concentration of people doing something that mattered. Lyra came by on the 4th day and watched for a while, and then crouched down and helped without being asked. She had good hands for it, careful and certain, the same quality she brought to everything. They worked for an hour without speaking. When they stopped, Lyra looked at the section they had completed with a satisfaction that had no performance in it. "It's going to take," she said. "Yes," Seren agreed. "The nodes are in good contact. 2 weeks, and the network should start rerouting through here." Lyra stood and looked at the corridor, the long path through the trees, where Derek's people had come 2 years ago, where something had been broken. "My family has been protecting this land for a very long time," she said. "Caden's family before us, and before that, the ones whose names we only know from the old records." She paused. "We have never had someone come from outside and put it back together." Seren thought about what she wanted to say and said it plainly. "I didn't come from outside. Not really. I just took the long way home." Lyra looked at her for a moment. The expression on her face was not warm, because Lyra was Lyra, but it was full and real and entirely without reservation. "Yes," she said, "you did." The solstice came on a Saturday. Caden woke her before dawn, which she had told him was acceptable only in specific circumstances, and which she discovered she did not actually mind when the specific circumstance was, "Come and watch." The moss fire clearing under solstice dawn was not something she had words for. She had seen it on an ordinary morning, the 12 minutes of copper and fire spreading inward from the edges, the light that came from below, the colour that only existed in autumn leaves and in this specific clearing at this specific time. But on the solstice, the angle of the dawn light was different, the duration was longer. The fire spread not just across the moss, but up, somehow impossibly, into the air above the clearing, the light refracting off the moisture in the cold air into something that was visible and not solid, and the exact colour of Caden's eyes. She stood in the middle of it with her arms at her sides and her mouth open. He stood beside her. When it finally eased, she turned to look at him. He was watching her, not the light. The way he had the first time, the same expression, the man who has brought someone to the most important place he knows and watched them see it. "Every year?" she asked. "Every solstice. Dawn and dusk both. I've been here for one solstice. Yes, I would like to be here for everyone." He looked at her. The gold of his eyes, which she now understood more fully, the Alpha's mark, the visible sign of what he carried and what he was, warm and steady in the winter morning. "I was counting on that," he said. Her phone rang at noon. Her father. She looked at the screen for a moment and felt the old shape of the feeling, the small bracing, the preparation for the version of herself she became in his presence. And then she felt it shift, because she was different now, and the person who had been shaped by that voice was not the only version of her anymore. She answered. "I've been thinking about what you said," her father said, without preamble, in the way he did everything. "About being home." And? A pause. He was not a man who paused easily. "I don't understand it. Your career, what you've built there isn't—" He stopped, restarted. "I saw the federal designation filing, your name on it, the species catalogue." Another pause. "It was significant work, Seren." She sat on the edge of the porch, looking at the winter trees. "It is," she said simply. "I may have—" He stopped again. It was costing him something. She could hear it, and she chose to wait without making it easier or harder. "I may have underestimated what you were capable of, out there." It was not an apology. It was also not nothing. "Yes," she said. "You did." Silence. "Are you happy?" he asked. The question sounded unfamiliar in his voice, like a word he didn't use often. She looked out at the forest, at the silver light moving through the winter canopy, at the cedar that had been growing in the same spot for 400 years, patient and enormous, connected underground to everything around it by threads she had spent her life learning to see. "Yes," she said, "I am." Another pause. "Good," he said. It was rough and a little awkward and entirely genuine. She hung up and sat for a moment on the cold porch. Something settled in her chest. Not resolution, not the dramatic closing of a wound, but a quiet shifting. A rearrangement. The voice that had told her she was not enough becoming, slowly, something smaller and further away. Caden came out with 2 mugs. He handed her one and sat beside her and looked at the trees. "How was it?" he asked. "Better than I expected." She held the warm mug. "Not perfect, but better." He nodded. He understood the difference. "The bond," she said after a moment. "Yes. Tell me again how it works, the choosing of it." She had asked before. She wanted to hear it again, in this light, on this morning with the solstice still in her. He looked at her. "You've already chosen it. The bond has been completing since the night of the meadow. Since you said you were certain, He paused. "The final sealing is, it requires a specific night, a full moon. It requires both of us choosing it, present and clear-eyed. After that it is permanent, irreversible, a part of what you are." "Tonight is the full moon," she said. "Yes." She turned to look at him. "I know," he said quietly. "I wasn't going to—" "I'm ready," she said, direct, certain. The scientist's voice, the one she trusted most. "I have been certain for weeks. I want to do it tonight." He looked at her for a long moment. "Seren," he said. "Yes." "I need you to know what it means. Not as information. You know it as information. But here," he put his hand over his heart, "here, you will always know where I am. You will feel this land as part of yourself. You will feel me as part of yourself. There is no undoing it. I know. I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of it. I know that too." She put her hand over his heart. "Caden, I fell into your arms, and you held me, and I was not afraid. I have not been afraid once. I've been exactly myself, more myself than anywhere else, since the moment I found you." She paused. "That doesn't happen. That is the rarest thing. And I am a scientist. I know better than anyone what rare means." His other hand came up to cover hers. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight," she agreed. They went to the moss fire clearing at midnight. The full moon was high and cold and extraordinary, filling the clearing with silver light that caught in the frost on the moss and threw it back in 1,000 small points. The cedars were dark and present and very still. The whole forest had that quality it had, the breathing attentiveness, the sense of something enormous and gentle paying full attention. The family came. Not all of them, and those who came did not come close. They stood at the edges of the trees, at the perimeter, present but not intruding, witnesses in the way that people who love each other witness the important things. Lyra stood at the northeast edge of the clearing, arms at her sides, expression still and calm and full of something that took Serene a moment to identify. It was pride. Lyra was watching with pride, and something else, something that might, on another face, have been called gratitude. Serene and Caden stood in the center of the clearing. She had not asked what the ritual required. He had told her, only presence, only honesty, only the full and clear choice. He held both her hands. "Tell me what you choose," he said quietly. "I choose you," she said. "I choose this land. I choose this family. I choose to be here, fully, permanently, not as a visitor or a researcher or someone passing through." She looked at him steadily. "I choose to stay." His eyes changed, the gold deepening, warming, the moss fire color, the specific, impossible amber of dawn light through leaves. "I choose you," he said. "I have been choosing you since the moment you fell out of the sky and were not afraid. I will choose you in every season, in every difficulty, in every ordinary morning." His hands tightened around hers. "I choose to be the person you trust with the difficult things. I choose to tell you the truth, including the truths that are hard to say. I choose to love you in ways that make you more yourself, not less." The frost on the moss around them caught the moonlight, and for a moment Seren saw it, saw the moss fire in winter, the sleeping light waiting under the surface, the warmth that lived in the ground even under the cold. He kissed her. And when he did something, moved through her, a warmth from the center outward, different from any other warmth, something that reached all the way down into the cold ground and all the way up into the winter sky and settled in every part of her at once. Not overwhelming, not frightening, like coming home, like the forest at dawn when the light is exactly right and every living thing is awake and paying attention, and there is nothing in the world but this specific moment and the understanding that it is exactly what it is supposed to be. At the edge of the clearing, Lyra made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a breath. Small, quiet, entirely involuntary. Serene heard it from within the kiss and felt her own chest expand with it. When they finally drew apart, Caden rested his forehead against hers. His breathing was unsteady. Hers was too. The forest was absolutely silent, that complete attending silence, the whole land leaning in. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said back. "How do you feel?" He considered it with his usual precision. Even now, even with his hands in her hair and the bond settling into both of them like light settling into water. "Like I have been given something I stopped believing in," he said. "And like I intend to earn it every day for the rest of my life." She held his face in her hands. "You already have," she said. "You have been earning it since you held me in a ravine and made the wolves go quiet and checked every scratch on my arm like it mattered." She paused. "It mattered. Everything you did, it mattered." He turned his face into her hand. They stood in the moss fire clearing under the full winter moon, and the family that had chosen them watched from the tree line, and the land held all of it with the patient certainty of something that had been waiting a long time for exactly this. In the morning, the solstice morning, the long dawn, Seren woke before the light and went to the clearing alone. She stood in the frost and the dark and waited. The first edge of dawn touched the eastern tree line. The moss fire began. Copper and amber and fire, spreading inward from the edges, rising through the cold air, that impossible color that had no name in any language she knew, but which she recognized now in her whole body as the color of home. It moved across the moss and up into the air and settled over the clearing like something alive and specific and permanent, and she stood in the center of it with her arms at her sides and her eyes open. Behind her, footsteps. She didn't turn. She knew the weight of them, the silence of them, the warmth that arrived before the person. Caden's arms came around her from behind. His chin rested on the top of her head. They stood together in the moss fire. "Every morning," he said quietly. "Every morning," she agreed. The light burned gold and copper, and the color of his eyes, and the forest breathed its enormous breath, and the moss beneath their feet held its ancient fire, and the land, this land, their land, knew them completely. And the word for all of it, the single word that held every piece of it, the ravine and the cedar house and the fever night and the meadow and the clearing and the solstice and the bond and the love and the choosing and the staying, the word the old families had used for 3 generations to name the place where the light came from below and told you that you were home. Mossfire. She ran into the dark. She fell into his arms, and she never ran again. If this story reached something inside you, if you felt the mossfire too, this channel exists because of you. Love Under the Full Moon is independent and listener-supported. YouTube does not monetize this content, which means every story here exists because the people who love these stories choose to keep them alive. If you want to go further, if you want to know what happened between Seren and Caden after the full moon, the night the bond completed, the scene the forest witnessed and we did not, that story lives on Patreon. The link is in the first comment below. Leave it in the comments if you made it here. Every single one of you matters to this story.